Hello, everyone. And I know you have posed many, many questions. The first question I will answer was the last question. Gregory Bateson, in Ecology of the Mind in the early 70s, wrote, "What is the pattern that connects the crab to the lobster and the orchid to the primrose, and all four of them to me and me to you?" Then I'd like to add that Hye-Yuan, Kwon, and Max, because I remember the last and very little of the first, remind me of caves. The cave, of course, was the second cave mentioned today. The first Lewis mentioned was Plato's cave. By the way, it doesn't start with seeing shadows. Actually, they hear sounds that are echoes in Plato's cave. But Hye-Yuan Kwon's cave, of course, of recorded sounds and measured reverberations, reminds me of all of the day, which is, it seems to me, struggling with invisibility. What to do with recognizing this existence of data that is somehow indirectly accessed by us today. This is very contemporary. However, the invisible registers, for various reasons, mainly to interact, to resist, to understand the sensory abilities of technology today, reminds me of X-rays and microscopes and theosophy and seeing the invisible and trying to do something with it in the late 19th century. So echo, etc., because it is too small, like phonons that are so small. When I was small and directed Documenta, we couldn't entangle electrons, and we couldn't even entangle atoms. They were huge when I went into Zellinger's lab. Zellinger's lab had a big thing, half the size of this stage, trying to freeze an atom in order to entangle atoms. At that time, we could only throw a little photon through a slit, and it split, and they danced together, and I saw the mirrors, and I said, hey, this looks like photo machines, analog cameras, and little bits of mirrors. And there they were doing that. But today, Libby reminded me that I'm old, and that between 2012 and now, we have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger, entangling things. But the question is, why? Why would one want to entangle bigger and bigger and bigger elements, freezing them, freezing them, freezing them, freezing them? By the way, why should they be frozen? Why can they not be entangled if they are not frozen? I will tell you, because they must slow down. They need to be very slow. So matter matters, and mattering matters in the explanation of quantum mechanics. But that brings us to the oracle, of course, oracle, and to the language we are speaking. Oracle comes, of course, from oraculum, which is Latin, but oraculum is an indigenous language from my parts of the world, the Mediterranean, and it comes from orare. Orare means to speak, but of course it later meant to pray. But orare comes from os, which is the mouth, while the Greeks did not use the word oraculum. They did not. They had another word, mantia, which of course reminds us of rapid divinations and chaotic research. But what were those people in those oracles? And first of all, how many were there? How many quantum computers are there now? Well, they shut down the NASA one, and they still have the IBM one. I understand you can even buy some time on it, Libby says. But do they have as many as there were of oracles? Herodotus in the 5th century BC told us that there were at least 18 oracles. And one, of course, you all know, is Delphi, and the others were Dodone and so on, and there were 7 Sibyls, and at least 7 Sibyls, one being the Cumana Sibyl. And where did the Cumana Sibyl sit? She sat in a cave, which brings us our 3rd cave. Now, what did they use for divination? Of course, divination comes from divinare, which is to look into the signs to find the future. My glasses are not good for this, so we will do this. And how did you do the divinations from divinus, which is God, which comes, of course, from the Indo-European root, which is dieu, which means to shine, which brings us to light, which brings us back to photons, those little things that they were entangling 13 years ago, or maybe 20, in Anton Zellinger's lab, for example. They would do it with trying to understand the signs, which were 2 types of signs. The signs from the so-called real, and the signs from the so-called divine. The divine signs were dreams, for example, and the signs for the real were birds, or bats, or whales, or intestines. And there were those signs to divine, which brings us to angels. And if Carolyn Christov-Bakargiev were to give a talk at this conference titled Echoes of Tomorrow, Soundscapes in the Age of Advanced Computing, here are 3 ideas that could intertwine her interest in angels and tunnels, says ChatGPT. Carolyn could explore the idea of angels as representations of quantum entanglement, where they act as messengers, connecting distant points in space and time. This could be linked to the concept of soundscapes, transcending physical boundaries, much like quantum particles, to create a non-localized experience. The notion of angels as interdimensional beings could be used to illustrate how advanced computing and AI transcend our traditional understanding of reality. I have no time to tell you about the tunnels in the ChatGPT suggestions for me. However, what is very interesting is that I have given lectures on angels over the last years, and therefore the analysis of Benjamin's Angel of History, which is painted in a frontal way, which is the opposite of how Benjamin wrote the text. Benjamin wrote the text as if we are seeing an angel looking at the rubble, unable to stop the shards of history. And yet the angel of Klee, there were many angels after World War I, there were many angels in the 1400s, there were many angels during the bubonic plague. The monotheistic religions of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are not about a linear history. I get born, live, die, go to heaven or hell. No, it's a very complicated, complex, uncertain dynamic of angels, which are generally beings which are ungendered and transparent. They don't have sex and they don't eat. But when you die, you can become an angel, and then in order to avoid the overpopulation of angels, which accompany us through life, but we almost don't see them in these parallel worlds, these multiverses of angels, they sometimes need to fall, and therefore we don't have the overpopulation of angels. The first fallen angel being Satan, which brings me to echo. Echo, eke, which is sound, from echo related to sound. Sound is echo. But the nymph, she was a nymph, and she lived in the mountains. She was one of the Oread nymphs. And Zeus was in love with her, and Hera was jealous. So Hera condemned Echo to only repeat the last words that someone said. She was in love with Narcissus then, but she could not tell Narcissus, I love you. She could only repeat sentences, and it irritated Narcissus. So Narcissus did not love her, and she cried until she evaporated, and her voice is heard in the mountains. But Nemesis, to vindicate Echo, takes Narcissus to a pool of water, where he falls in love with himself and dies from not eating and being in the pool. So that brings me to, we've gone through Lily, Noam. Noam has written a beautiful text intimating that perhaps this need to translate into a register which is perceivable by our senses in a video or in a sound installation or something, what might be intimations of this hierarchy, Hieros, the world of the angels, which is the subatomic world or the invisible worlds or the many worlds or the distant worlds, might be something similar to what Rosalind Krauss was talking about when she mentioned the indexical. So she takes Noam a quantum leap and says, maybe the same thing is happening now. Now, that's from another history of intellectuality. We don't read Rosalind Krauss in the Mediterranean, so I don't know that much about that. But what I can tell you is that Agnieszka Kuranc took a quantum leap today, and in a metaphorical sense, when something completely changes, like maybe suddenly we will go from a singular subjectivity to a collective subjectivity. But I thought I never had only genomes from human in my body. I thought I had bacteria in my body 40,000 years ago. So I wonder if maybe the quantum leap is already in a parallel world some other time. But maybe the quantum leap is to make a new organism out of the metals again, which brings us to skepticism. The skeptic, of course, in the room was Marina, who said something about Adorno, who was mentioned twice today, also by Max. Poor Adorno had been taken out of our conversations for so long. But what is that reference that she made to Trost, which is solace? Is that timer ever going to go off? Is it on? 7 minutes, thank goodness. So, Trost, solace. What is Trost, solace? It is a phenomenon, an emotion that art can give you, but only through a sense of critical consciousness, which means that you know that art is that thing which is no longer what it is once you know what it is. Of course, his aesthetic theory said that. So there is a political necessity of resistance in her work, and in the concert they played. What did they play? They played something that you cannot hear, which is a micro sound of scratching on a plate to make a plate, to make a print, to make a record. But that was not audible, and therefore it was amplified in the way that Noam Siegel said before. And that digital tonality and that digital space that she created was retranslated into basically an analog situation, or rather a superposed, to go back to Libby, situation on that machine together in an attempt at physical entanglement, almost sexual, going on over there. And then Yussi's wonderful idea of living, of surfaces, the globe as a surface, it made me sad to think of flat maps. And I'm not even sure it's round. I don't think it's necessarily round, the planet. That also is an abstraction. But my efforts would not be to make it round again once it has been flattened by all of us. And actually, tunnels do interest me, as ChatGPT said. And tunnels can't really be seen by satellites. So the whole historical period from the 1960s, let's say, the moon landing and the blue planet of 1969, it was July. I remember the day in front of the TV, I am that old. That event happened, and from then on, there was no more the world or the cosmos or the universe or the multiverse. There was a damn ball. And the damn round ball indeed became all these pictures and all these pictures. So now tunnels are very important, and we might all go back to live in caves at some point. But in caves, it is very hard to have photosynthesis go on. So we would have to become bats, which brings us to a reference to Tolstoy. I don't know who said something about Russia. And that reminded me of agrarian ruralism and Tolstoy, which reminded me of Christianity and angels and spatial storytelling. And then I saw the beautiful book of my friend Esther Leslie. I love that book, Synthetic Worlds, also the other books. Planetarity I had never used, but maybe I should go back to the beginning, because I've missed so many people and so many things. The feedback production loop, the temporality of algorithm, suspending history, predictive approach, quantum computation is movement of electrons, is not linear, non-predictive. We knew that already in the Baroque. In the 1600s, what is a spiral column? What is Bernini talking about in Santa Teresa de Avila, the sculpture Ecstasy? He's talking about the broken down shards of the universe of the 1500s. I'm speaking from my situated knowledges, and that's all I can tell you today.